I'll be introducing myself for the next half hour, followed by 2 minutes of some visuals that we will show you. Just let me know if you can hear me clearly. Is this clear? Yeah? Okay. Right. So I have this fantasy, one in which I stand or sit before an audience made up of yourselves, look you in the eye and say, I have this fantasy. Then I pause. Just the word rainbowing in front of your blinking eyes. Vulnerable, not because I'm about to share a secret, but because I'm asking myself that am I, and yes I am, making myself vulnerable. I'm opening myself to the dynamics of a public space, risking the untried and the untested in front of a group of thinking, breathing intellects, yours. Taking a risk, which is what your artistic selves are meant to do each time you create. Take a risk. The linear is of no use to me. Don't get me wrong, I know that it is easier to get from A to B or from A to Z via B, C, D, and E, and so on. But I am curious about all the combinations of the alphabet that may make my travel a bit more adventurous. Difficult, perhaps, even prone to risk. But that may also make the learning that much more exciting. And the thinking, and the problem solving. I will never know how much until I set out, try it. I love a certain order in my life, but I prefer chaos a lot more. The bumps more than the flatlands. Order must conceal the effort. The effortless takes a lot of planning. The method must not slip out and establish its monumental presence before an adoring audience. Methodology has a leaning towards the hegemonic. That word, the demon hiding in the hedge, hedging one's bets. I would rather leave an audience confused and risk its annoyance as long as what I was attempting had the possibility of making it think, explore, seek meaning, even if it meant struggling. Struggle and freedom from structure. The predictability of order. For the apparently chaotic is not without its logic. It needs very careful negotiation to carve a path through the unpredictable, but there are ways, yes, there are ways. To turn the worm from below, from beneath its eye level, like boring a hole into the floor from the ceiling below and catching it unawares. Build the structures you need before dismantling them, like bridges burnt. Seal the escape routes. Get rid of the steps you had hurriedly strung between two upright lengths of wood-metal rope for your ladders, the ones you needed to get to that ceiling, the one you would soon drill to the floor above. Rehearse the revolution. Practice it. You are at risk. Subterfuge, sleight of hand, strategy that conceals, like successful camouflage, the left hand from the right. Subversion has to begin at the bottom. So how do I explain a lifetime in an hour? How do I share the secret of filling emptiness with strangers? How do you create so much emptiness, they asked him. It isn't empty really, is it? I mean, there's the light, the stillness takes up space, and surely they could see. It wasn't that difficult. This was getting uncomfortable. It wasn't as if there was something he wished to hide. On the contrary, there were no secrets. But the more he tried to explain, the more confused they grew. Why? He was being sincere and thorough. It was important that they travel back with him to trace his relationship with the stage. Why he felt the way he did. The ease with which he had learned to turn his everyday routine into drama. Taking upon himself the burden without in any way feeling the weight, as long as his work got done. His work in the arts, as he put it. This required acumen and money. There was no before and after in his understanding of money. You began your work before you got it and continued it after you'd spent it. If this was enigma, so be it. He yearned of a time when he could slip out of his skin and slither away into the grass, leaving reality to others. But the questions were being asked and the answers being sought. What is the stage experience made up of? An iconography of impressions, of influences, of readings and viewings, of imbibing without sipping, of drunkenness and wantonness, of illnesses born impatiently, of hurting, of waiting for hours on end, of learning to string green peas with a fork and knife, of stealing ideas, of cheating by turning pictures upside down and reproducing them as fresh designs, of hero worshipping, of lusting, of restlessness and frustration, of poverty, of opportunities missed, of opportunities grabbed, of inabilities, of struggling in a body that senses movement but cannot replicate it, of bearing crosses, of shyness and its opposite, of learning to beg for favors, of living with mud-spattered faces, of buried pride and countless funerals, of trepidation, of houses that sold out and those that had too few audiences, of failed cues and moments of magic, of caring, of detail, of ingenuity, of sensing that A ladders are not just for climbing, of throwing caution to the winds, of risks taken and toes stubbed, of slippery slopes and replays, of counseling sessions, of loving women and men, of being moved over issues that seem doomed to early death, of politics and hours spent on railway stations, of art, of music, of cinema, of tears that came easily, of tears that don't, of fabric, of wood, of metal, of paint, of paper, of grease, of the never-ending desire to make what is not look like what is. I invite you to travel, to wander the thickly populated lands of memory in a ghost-like manner, all seeing but unseen. Who knows what you shall find? Why is memory so often sensual? And what does memory have to do with designing stages, or books, or catalogues? Everything. It is the hour after Babri Masjid. I am to design yet another stage for a concert featuring Hari Prasad Chaurasia and Zakir Hussain at the G.D. Birla Sabhagar in Calcutta. I have been doing their stages for the last 15 years, using whatever material I can lay my hands on. There have been stages for bhajans with 1600 terracotta pitchers forming a gigantic half moon with an aquamarine Krishna and his gopis in a Navras Malika painted on the pitchers as if the undulating surface was a canvas. For a Bismillah Khan concert ushering in the new year with a cluster of large chandeliers gathering dust on the floor in one corner of the stage. The rest is full of half-covered antique chairs, helter-skelter, giving a sense of a large Haveli which has seen a glorious past but is now in tatters. For a Kishore Monkar morning with a backdrop of suspended planks, charred and soot-covered, hanging from pristine white ropes like giant swings. Each plank has 100 smouldering clay lamps. 50 planks, 5,000 snuffed lamps, and the wisp of innumerable smoke drifts, struggling to find a way out of the theatre, succeeding instant to float upwards and hover above the singer and the musicians, listening, remembering time that was. But today this whimsy will not do, or if it will be bursting with anger and frustration and despair, for I have just heard the rumor that in the wake of the mosque demolition backlash, some people have rushed into the train from Pune to Bombay to cut off Zakir's hands. How does one translate this into the helplessness of a stage design that will both be a tribute to a great musician and a release for my own impotence? I reach for the two aluminium A ladders lying in the theatre, one taller than the other. I place them diagonally across the back of the 16-foot by 8-foot platform covered in black velvet, which is in turn placed square on a matte black floor cloth that shrouds the entire floor of the stage. I then proceed to insert wooden battens like giant spikes into the different rungs of the ladders, like a porcupine that has been startled. I then rip open reams and reams of blood-red cloth and suspend one end from the black flies above the ladders. The other end ties the ladders into knots and spills over onto the black velvet, makes its way across the black of the floor cloth. There is no stopping the blood now. It flows freely and out of control, like an artery that has been slit. It covers the seats, bisects the hole diagonally, spills into the foyer and up the stairs and onto the street. The audience sit on bloodied seats. Theatre and memory, to recall an event, to free it from the clutches of memory, and in remembering, in recounting or describing it, to create the possibility of drama. For in description lies the temptation, even the necessity of embellishment, of adornment, of enhancement, and of course, of omission. What the memory chooses to conceal or fail to reveal is as inherent in the retelling of an event as is the relationship between that which is being narrated and that which is being received by the listener viewer, the audience. Or to put it another way, the tale being told may not be the tale being heard. And in both the telling and the hearing lies the possibility of that which is left untold, the unsaid. The unsaid, impregnated by mystery, carries with it the seeds of the dramatic. The narrating of the unsaid uses a language of its own, the lingua franca of subtext, a text that carries within it an entire lexicon of unseen gestures, signs cleverly scattered across the body of what is being said so as to escape immediate detection. Subterfuge, or the art of building up suspense, or that which makes its presence felt by its apparent absence, carrying within it an entire universe of implied meaning that appeals directly to the senses, perhaps. Rabindra Southern, in what is still Calcutta, Shambhu Mitra and Tripti Mitra come together after years of estrangement for a charity performance of Char Adhyay. The performance is brilliant, electrifying even. The standing ovation is a long affair. Seen together after what must seem like aeons to those who carry grateful memories of their days as man and wife and theatre partners, the audience is reluctant to leave, to believe that this may be their last double act. The applause dies down, and in that one pause before the curtain, a clear, desperate, hoping against hope voice echoes what the other 1103 voices carry in their hearts. Dujon ke abar dekhte chai. We want to see the two of you again. The silence that follows for a brief eternity meets the fate of all such silences. It needs a knife to cut through it. Then Shambhu Mitra does something that goes right to the core of our stretched to the limit senses. He makes what must go down as the simplest of hand gestures with his right hand and elbow. A gesture that whispers, Inshallah, God willing, to each and every individual present as if he has spoken to them and them alone. Is it simply the myopia that attaches itself to nostalgia that makes those of us who grew up in the 60s and were watching, doing our theatre through the 70s, feel that it was more desperate, more angry, more stubborn, more necessary? Why do we feel that the whole act of performance then was as if our life depended on it? That now it is at best an acquired competence, and at worst vapid? Is there some truth in the lament that we have run out of causes? So invent new causes, seek them out, or learn to recognize their new guises. A theatre aspiring towards any kind of relevance cannot live off a continuous diet of excuses. The causes are around us, and they are twice as relevant. Genuine reinvention is never done in the manner of an acquired skill. It happens intuitively. At best, the presence of a circle of circumstances helps the process gain fruition, momentum, maturity. One day you're visited by grace, a blossoming that is first seen by the people around you. You may always be the last one to find out, and if you're lucky, you may never know. For in the knowing lies the risk of distraction. I am disturbed by talk of signature styles. It bothers me. My botheration, I confess, borders on annoyance and has little to do with the style each artist adopts as her or his own. One that they instinctively grow and evolve into, like the excellent wine from a particular vineyard that begins to be recognized, even missed by one's palate. I have no problem with that. My disquiet begins when this style begins to be written in stone and is replicated day after day and lauded as the artist's signature. An enchanting and comfortable entrapment indeed, but therein lies the rub. Why would a creative being wish to be bound by a style that arrives with much excitement, even fanfare, and then becomes static? Where is the plasticity of evolution? The ever-changing and therefore ever-surprising inspiration that attracts and twists the viewer's attention. I want to be shocked, disturbed, surprised each time I see a new body of work by an artist. I don't wish to be made comfortable, like a guest at a five-star hotel frequented year after year, and where everyone is familiar with my taste and eager to please. Your ability to reinvent is not just about the art you make. It is also the provocation that results in making me rethink and reevaluate my way of receiving and imbibing your creativity. I have to be kept on my toes and not on my back. You are not a spa. You're an artist. So churn the insides of your viewers, then puncture their selves with little tiny pinpricks and turn them into the finest of sieves so that they may separate the grain from the chaff. Oh, and please, don't allow yourself to be dictated by the market. The market is the creation of a successful myth, one that attracts like a magnet, almost against one's will. You cannot entertain your viewers. This is not your purpose. Your task is to disturb them, to open their eyes, their minds, alerting them to the possibility of receiving unconditionally, through intuition and not through the jaded language of the marketplace. After all, that is what your calling as an artist is all about, isn't it? I have this fantasy. Pause. I'm often asked about where my sense of the aesthetic came from, the one that is personal, and when, as if to suggest that it was a recognizable moment, one marked by time, like waking up with an idea of the aesthetic and proceeding to practice it. Nothing like that. I think, like life, it had its beginning moments, then grew into adolescence with my years in the theatre. Later, the art and the photography and the books gave it tangible form, one that continues to mature over time. Here are a few personal beginning moments. Watching my father spend his Tuesday off days in our tiny rectangular kitchen in Ripon Street, Calcutta, the one with a long, narrow window at the end, making fish kebabs. He would begin his meditation with cleaning the kitchen, setting out the tools of the trade down to the last possible ingredient he might need, and utensils. The fish had to be bathed and made ready for the sacrifice. The scaling, washing, anointing in an orange-red masala, made from a formula that was a closely guarded secret from his days at the Oberoi Flatties in Lahore. A mixture that would give the finely cut pieces of fish their color and taste. The reverence with which these would be marinated in a round, open, stainless steel thali. No extraneous bits of coloring accidentally hanging on for dear life to the edges of the thali or the marble slab on which it lay waiting. Clean and tidy. An aerial view would show a pattern akin to a shoal of gleaming orange fish swimming in formation. Only in this case, it was a still photograph. No lagging truants hurrying to catch up. Then would come the moment of reckoning when each deeply marinated chunk of fish would be lifted affectionately between fingers and gently slid down the curved walls of a deep round frying pan with circular earring-shaped handles. One after the other, the whole pool of simmering oil slowly coming alive with fish, like boats on a moonlight night making their way to sea for a bout of deep-sea fishing, or a bonsai flotilla about to engage the enemy. In happier days, he enjoyed dressing up in the more formal styles of the day. I know this because I inherited sharkskin trousers in what was called the cigar cut. And of course, I used to marvel at his suits and jackets, most of all the tie collection he boasted, the cufflinks. I remember the ones with the head of Socrates. The interesting part being that he would set out the clothes every morning and evening before taking his bath. Now, I didn't stop at his own clothes being laid out on the bed. He would more often than not select my mother's saris and blouses to match, particularly for special occasions. He would lay these out with immense courtesy. After having taken great pains to iron them, there were no ironing boards in those days, so the dining table for four would double up, suitably covered with a thick maroon-colored bed cover folded into quarter-inch size for thickness. On this, he would spread a white bed sheet, also folded, and on this freshly created surface, he would iron the 6-yard chiffon or silk or whatever the weather suggested as appropriate. So you had this large double bed with their festive wear laid out in neat combinations, his and hers. It wouldn't stop there. Socks and a silk kerchief, freshly polished black or brown leather shoes in his case, appropriate bangles, earrings, a necklace and sandals in hers. Time, something that we always appear not to have. And yet it is time that we need to bring ideas to fruition. Ideas, by their very definition, are the untried and the untested. That which is new and therefore without precedent, hence the attraction of a good idea. Remember, ideas only become good or bad after they're born, sent out into the world, nurtured, given a chance to grow. Should they succeed, we applaud them. Failure goes unrewarded, unnoticed. This is not to say we don't learn from things that go wrong. We do. Some ideas need revisiting again and again with new insights and fresh learning. Some of the failed ones find their ways to flowering. At least that is what I believe and practice. I'm often asked about sustainability, about structure, about vision, and the ability to reinvent. I never have convincing answers. I have no scientific or rational methods of arriving at things. I live hand in hand or hand in glove, and therefore complicit with uncertainty and the intangible, the opposites of structure. I'm aware that I also live in a time that does not lend credence to that feeling at the pit of your tummy, that gut feeling, particularly not in business or politics. In fact, it is fast fading even in the arts. My life is indistinguishable from the life of and the life at Seagull. My work is my life. This is something that I need to explain and something that many people have a lot of difficulty understanding. My work does not end with the working day. It happens constantly as breath, through all my thoughts and interactions and readings. Everything leads out from my work and everything leads back in. This is my life, this is my work, this is therefore my life's work. The choices I make in life and at Seagull, or have made, have depended on survival. Then again, survival has always been a consideration, but not always the uppermost one, trumping all other considerations. If that was so, I don't think Seagull would be where it is today. While everything arises from passion, needs, and collective excitements, and of course the ability to take the consequences, financial or otherwise, of those choices, sometimes choices have also meant shutting down projects, returning books, weeding out dead stock, letting go of dead weights, recognizing redundancies, and jumping off the bandwagon once too many others have jumped onto it, usually following our example. But yes, above all, the choices have been made to fill a need that was not being filled. So we started Seagull Books at a time when there was no Indian publisher bringing out books on theatre and cinema. To share our excitements in the larger world, hence the Seagull School of Publishing, where we share our publishing knowledge and experience with those wishing to join the industry, or those in the industry wishing to remember why they joined it in the first place. To recoup our losses. So after we lost lakhs of rupees worth of stock in the fire that ravaged the Calcutta Book Fair, we started the Seagull Bookstore to make the Seagull stall a permanent feature in the city. To earn from art, to support our books and other programs, hence the Seagull Foundation for the Arts, that presents artists and exhibitions across the country, combining its repertoire of art veterans with fresh young blood. Yet we have been the first to recognize when we had either moved on from a particular idea or when the idea appeared to have lived out its time. So the Seagull Arts and Media Resource Center, when it seemed to be stuttering and stammering in the city as modes of reading and music listening and full film watching, even arts researching changed, and members seemed to dwindle, has been transformed into the country's first museum for the remarkable Indian painter K.G. Subramanian. So too, in order to acquire worldwide distribution and to reverse the more colonial order of publishing, where books from the West travel to the East and the journey in the reverse direction is often heard, we began Seagull Books London Limited in 2005. What does that mean? It means that all the work still happens in Calcutta, but we have registered a company in the UK, a bank account and a chartered accountant, book distributors in the form of the University of Chicago Press. It also means that every book we now publish goes out to the whole world, the same edition. So our writers, our translators, and our readers are now all over the globe. Our books are crisscrossing continents, languages, and territories, flying with ease through the universe of ideas, yet retaining to the care of their editing and presentation an unusual identity, their uniquely Seagull presence. This was a choice. To remain in Calcutta and not move to the publish center of Delhi, To work from the fringes in a way that makes the center redundant, that was a choice. To be a global presence from a sleepy city in Calcutta, to have one aesthetic that cuts across so-called design rules, to publish quality with courtesy and courage. All these have been choices, consciously or unconsciously made, choices that appear now, as I speak to you, as choices. At the time, they were just ideas we were tilting at, armed with passion and persistence, because if we stopped or stopped trying, how would we survive? I have a flaw. I want to do everything. Don't you wish that you could do everything? Or at least a lot of things. I want to experience, I want to be part of a process that has no apparent game plan. Who pays for my wants, my indulgences? Remember that there is usually a price tag attached. I do. It's the best way. Besides, it always keeps the world guessing. And that gives me immense pleasure. The thought that there is a world out there, however small, wondering the how and where and why or what makes me tick. Underlining all this is an urge to survive and to do things. Specifically, things in the arts. And this is precisely what we at Seagull have been doing for the last 40 years or so. Survival carries with it a sense of the precarious, of just about keeping your head above water. This is true, but it need not necessarily make for a strained, unhappy look. As long as you manage to take care of your daily necessities, the urge to produce a certain kind of book that few wish to buy, or make it possible for an experimental performance to take place because you persisted with it, or exhibit an artist's work that no one else wished to present, the rest will fall into place. Ours is therefore practice that will always remain vulnerable. Our vulnerability to ideas makes us receptive to all that is new and untried, especially in these dark times when culture is slowly but surely being hijacked by forces that are anything but benign. I do, for example, feel watched in a way I never have before, and I'm afraid that a technology that I do not understand is both spying on me and entertaining me. I'm under surveillance even as I am seduced by it, the all-pervasive it of our lives. The it as state, as a state of mind, as a powerful presence that will have its way. It as corporation, it as newspapers, as television, as theatre and cinema, it as media with a capital M, it as power that knows no boundaries, it without conscience, yes. It is like listening to music that is both hypnotic and evil, that attracts, that refuses to let go of my attention. I listen to the songs, but I do not understand the words. The space for our songs is not as free as it used to be. The Seagull way of life is a mercurial, flexible, broad-minded, tolerant, and philosophical practice. We respond, therefore we practice. The urge to keep doing, to keep working away at something that enhances things cultural in some form or the other, that benefits those that practice things cultural and helps them further from point A to point D. That's what drives us at Seagull every day. Even as the first snow began to fall, I looked over my shoulder to see the footsteps I had left behind, following me like shadows that refuse to let go, holding on for dear life, changing shape and sizes, reversing direction, becoming shorter or longer, often disappearing completely, then reappearing, clutching my arms and feet and shoulders and often reaching for my face or the back of my head, dodging, skipping, hopping, lying low and pouncing, all with the same degree of breathlessness. I look again and see the little snow flurries blowing away the marks left behind by my retreating feet, smoothing the snow, patting it back into shape, cleaning up after me as it were, leaving no traces behind, as if no one had walked this way before, except perhaps the winter wind. Thank you. Just a few images of the Seagull spaces and a few book covers just to kind of, and then the books are there on a display. So this is the Seagull bookstore. It's totally our own books. So
Where is it in Calcutta?
this is in Calcutta and Bhawanipur near Indira Cinema. So this is still the bookstore, different views of it. So we do about 50 books a year. So, you know, we've Yeah. So that's the publishing office. That looks like Nimai Ghosh, by the way, which is probably, and yeah. So carry on. Just this is where we publish out of. There's about half a dozen of us. That's where I sit usually when I'm not sitting here. Okay. So this is the Subramanian space that I told you about, the ground floor, till we can afford to get something larger. So this is a set of 4 rooms which have been turned into like a museum of his work. This is the Seagull School of Publishing, which is just above that. It's like a mirror image, same sort of 4 rooms. And that's the editing class without the students. That's the design studio, which Shunandini runs. Well, that's a design class. That's Shunandini Banerjee, who creates every single design we do. These are just some covers, so just to give you a sense of the aesthetic. This is the fall. This is the list that's coming out from August to January. We're reissuing all our Eisensteins as part of the 100 years of the Soviet Revolution thing in October. This is the new Bangladesh list that we're doing, translation. All of this is one person's work, the designs, Shunandini. That's it? Good.
First of all, thank you very much for this very inspiring flow of words to listen to. And I thought, could you elaborate maybe a bit more on this thing that you especially were talking about in the beginning about your thoughts on structure and how structure can become something rather oppressive in a creative work after a certain point, which kind of starts being in a conflict with structure being inherent in aesthetics when you think about how texts work, and then do you think you lose something through going in an interpolation between different points instead of following a straight line to a certain thing we haven't yet reached? And sometimes that's something I wonder about, whether if we just keep on interpolating across a plane, whether we stop discovering really new things because we don't have the consequence to push ahead in just one direction and take that kind of focus.
Well, I think you've very adequately and elegantly answered the question yourself, which is that I'm not against a structure that you can make it work, right? I'll give you a little anecdotal example, then come back to this, which is that, and it's not just one example, what happens in the Seagull life is that people get attracted to our supposed way of working, our aesthetics, our designs, our way of responding to ideas, and so on and so forth. And they then become so close and like family. It could be somebody coming from, say, a university press to teach at the school, who's in the beginning got attracted to the way you work, or it could be an artist. Later, when they become close, they want to teach you how to do it better. In other words, no, seriously, I have what happens, for example, there's a kind of sense that they see in us some kind of like a lack of structure. Why? Because there are 6 editors, all of whom copy edit, all of whom set their own text. They do their own inside pages, see it to print, so they all know which books they are following, packing, freighting, shipping till it gets to the Chicago warehouse. So people get confused because there is no Excel sheet. It's an open space you can go across. But if we were 58 or 60 people, perhaps we would need a different structure. But it's also, I think, got to do with the fact that anybody and everybody for years, over 45 years, whoever walks into our space, if you walk in, say, I have no idea what that encounter is going to be. You could be coming in to ask me for, as a theatre person, a young theatre person, for sponsorship help because you see me having done this for 30 years. But listening to you, I will not be able to stop myself from developing, responding, engaging in a conversation that may actually lead to a project where you don't have to look further for sponsorship because I get involved as a. So there is that impulse. But if you had a structured set of budgeted so many shows a year or so much, so it's not that I'm saying that you don't do it like that. The rest of the world does work. I mean, the whole publishing world works on structures. Our structure has a certain freedom, we feel, to both stumble, change our mind, to pick up pieces, and to be able to. It's like I keep saying to people that our list is actually a wish list of half a dozen people, and yet it holds together. When you look at it retrospectively and you see it like a strategy. It's all about retrospective structures, if you like. You study them and you will see method into it. When we're doing it, we can't, you're too busy clearing the whales to get to the next idea. How do you execute it? And some of it has to do with theatre training in the sense that you grow up improvising in a certain way. You have problems, you have very little resources. You make do with whatever material is available to create something different.
Right.
And so I've treated my entire life like a project. You book a hall, you have this much time, you rehearse, you do it, you put it up, next thing, Maybe it started because I had to freelance and earn a living from age 16 and do everything I wasn't trained to do. So.
And then this multitude of different actors that you're involving in.
Sorry?
This array of different actors that you're involving in your Seagull project, maybe that also comes from your initial time in theater and the way of working. I mean, you have this team of designers and then your editors. And
yeah, all of whom have grown into it. So if you, for example, let us say you come into Seagull as a editor, assistant editor or a designer, and slowly you discover that we become interested in what you want to do after 5 or 6 or whatever. In other words, like most structured regular jobs, the so-called unwinding that you need, or the so-called hobbies or other activities you wish to pursue, in Seagull, we tend to often absorb your own wishes of what kind of projects you want to do and make them our own 9 times out of 10, not of some mad idea of trying to make you slave around the clock, but because it's something we've always done. We've responded to ideas. So if in-house people have ideas, why should they look elsewhere? So you make it possible for them to do it. You also give a lot of freedom to people, because we've had cases where, for example, I used to design all Seagull books till about 17 years ago. I used to set them, photograph them, do them. I had to teach myself how to do it. And then Anjum and I, we hired a young person as an assistant editor who started in her spare time to tinker with typefaces on the old Apple Macintoshes. Started like that. And one tested that. You gave her something to do, gave her something to do, gave her something to do, till it became a sort of strange situation where even these so-called plum covers that I might have been tempted to do, I was giving her because there was immediate recognition that this was a far superior sensibility at work. So it's an instinctive letting go, because that gives me time to do all the other things I want to do. It kind of, you see, letting go is not just articulating the words letting go. It's an intuitive practice. You have to work hard at it, like you have to work hard at being a good person in these dark times.
Is there something?
There's somebody there raising their hand.
Naveen, thank you for this wonderful memoir in the first place, but a fairly specific question, if I could just draw you out. Just looking at these lovely covers, you clearly see that over the years you've developed conversations with publishers in the non-Anglophone world,
That's right.
Hansa, Zurkamp. Could you talk a little bit about how that evolved, seeking out authors and imprints in Germany and France?
I had to buy him a sandwich to ask that question, by the way. Okay, so there's Life from 1982 June. So June 20th, by the way, makes it 35 years of publishing. So in 2005, we were perfectly happy creatures, having slowly come out of the red after 17 years and all the rest of it, when we did something slightly tongue-in-cheek, and maybe in retrospect it was like a bit of a political thing, which is we looked at all these wonderful multinationals, Pat Macmillan, Hatchett's, Bloomsbury, Random Penguin, all the wonderful publishing in India is actually a rung beneath that, which is all the independents, the Zubans and the Tulikas, the leftwards, and you have then these multinationals. So American and British publishers felt that we speak the language, so we must be great book buyers, which we are. So let's set up shop here. So we kind of half joked and said, what if we existed and reversed this and said, Seagull, London, New York. And if our money was as good as theirs, our designs better sometimes, production qualities, editing. What we lacked was a reasonably courteous distribution to owe your authors the courtesy of being available in at least specialist bookstores. Once that fell into place with the University of Chicago Press, so every book that I do goes into their warehouses. They distribute it all over the world. In India, we keep back what we need for India, and that gets subsidized by the dollar price. So you have a $25 book being sold for 500 rupees, that kind of stuff. So once that was in place, what is your content? And I have always, since I'm not a great turner of pages of the Bible, I used to always, as a young person, turn to European literature in times of trouble, right? And these books were all available here, all the bookstores in this country. Don't fool yourself. They were all available 25 years ago. The most amazing literature used to be on our footpaths at Park Street. It used to be on a textbook opposite the Xavier's. I mean, we picked up the best of everything because somebody in America and England was publishing translations seriously. And somebody, specifically old man who started Rupa, was bringing them in. Then that stopped, and 2 generations or 2.5 generations of kids have grown up without that kind of a salad bar to choose for their intellects. So I saw that as a little niche opening, saying, and it was 100 years of Jean-Paul Sartre. So I went to Gallimard because I was familiar with their archives more than they were, because they had younger people then. And I remembered, Gallimard publications translated. So I asked for the Sats, and they were very surprised that I knew them. But their question was, and it took 2 years sometimes, to convince people in Germany. Their question was, Calcutta, Sartre, Gerdebord, Antoine. I said, no, it's for the world. That was another hurdle, to convince people who are used to only selling territories that you want rights for the world. Remember that for the last 70 years of our existence, publishers in India are meant to only buy rights for their subcontinent. The American West can cherry pick your list for the world, so they buy world rights. We were reversing that and saying, no, we will sell everywhere. And unlike the Americans, we have a ready-made place in India. They keep trying to get to India. So once that hurdle happened, so in the beginning, I went with my reading. So I was doing Adorno's and Enzensberger's and Sartre's and things I grew up reading. And then I met this colossal, what seemed like a boo-boo, but turned out to be a great boon, which is I turned to my circle of initial translators and said, don't you guys have a wish list? There was silence, because publishers are not meant ever to ask translators for wish lists, because translators are supposed to pitch projects at publishers who are supposed to sit for years in options. So that started a kind of circle of trust. Also, once the books came out and they looked so good, word began to spread, right? And in Germany, for example, particularly Zuckam, it was like they sort of have become so protective that if you're offering them X thousand euros for a particular book, they say, no. Nancy is now seeing herself as, you're the principal publisher, so give her 1,000, she'll be very happy. So they became protective at that level. So your choice for Europe in literature was a conscious one, because they were missing. And in some strange way, I like to believe that the last 12 years, there has been a spurt in other publishers doing more and more of this. It has brought things back. It takes time, but I think, who was doing translations other than Dalkey and New Directions and people like that, the great independents who've always done it. But all the Faraz, Strauss, Giro's and, the major publishers were slowly doing much less. So all of these we acquire world rights to. We get them translated, by the way, at £95 now. When we started with 70 per 1,000 words, and use the best translators. So for the classical ones, you would go to their existing relationships if they were alive. The new ones, you tested, you did your sampling. It's not easy, because you don't have in-house editors in French and German and Italian and so on and so forth. So you have to work with the best people and trust them. Sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes translations are actually rejected by the author, and you have to start afresh. You have to pay both translators. So there are lots of case histories of that kind of screw up too. Does that answer what you? Yeah.
So you talked about ideas, right? You talked about letting go. You talked about taking choices, I think. Could you elaborate on that and the importance of instinct? I want to hear that again, if you don't mind. Can you please elaborate on that? You addressed it too quickly, I thought.
Okay.
It's very difficult, because when you're actually dealing with these kind of situations in life, it becomes almost like a life and death matter, especially when you're really young and you have no experience of any sort. So what is that one should remember, or what one should practice?
Well, I think what I was trying to say was that your work and life always offers up choices, like it would to you at this particular time in your life, either as a student or as a new working person or whatever, or in relationships and so on and so forth. All I was trying to suggest was that often these are not 5-year targeted, pre-planned strategies in place, right? That's very important to realize that. So you should be perfectly comfortable if you're not always entirely sure, because unless you follow the instinct or impulse to begin something, and in that context we often began stuff. You are in charge of your own life, supposedly, or you should be. In which case, if something goes wrong, you can step back from it. Because as a young person, you have a strong enough face, so a bit of shit on it in terms of pride shouldn't really cripple you psychologically or otherwise, is my thinking. And then the next thing is if you blindly keep following a choice that turns sour, and just because you made it and because you're going to lose face, it doesn't make sense either. So there has to be, and that develops as you grow older, as you experience things, get knocked about or not, or have successes. That comes with time. You know, the ability to recognize, oh, and also for us, I've always said that it's great retrospective when you look back and you look at it. It seemed almost like great flashes of brilliance for things that worked, and its opposite for things that were a disaster. Well, that's how it is. Does that help in any way? Or does that confuse? Anjum, any elaboration on choices? Give it a mic, yeah.
It's just what I've watched happening is that we always talked about a process of doing an intuitive growth, you know, responding to things rather than setting out with a pre-decided agenda, which was so strong that it didn't allow you to be reactive and responsive. So a question of allowing yourself that flexibility to grow in maybe other directions than you earlier thought you were going to grow in. So Seagull, if you watch the trajectory of Seagull, has been many different things at different points in time. And that could be seen as maybe a weakness, but it could also be seen as a strength. The ability to move on in a combination of factors, either because you feel you've done what you needed to do in a particular field, and now other people are doing it perfectly adequately, so you're not really needed anymore. And combination of also responding to a new challenge or a new circumstance, or identifying a need that suddenly comes, you suddenly see something and you say, hey, there's a gap that needs to be fulfilled. How about trying to address that? So I guess that is what the intuition part is, a kind of constantly having your antenna open within the field in which you're working. If you're an artist, if you're whatever, wherever you are, sort of within that field.
Samira?
No, but I want to just say something, because the way you guys are talking, it's not, I mean, what I see with Seagull's work and with other artistic organizations that are able to build in this way is that underlying it all is a great clarity of purpose, which is not about the detail of the bookstore or the publishing. It's a great clarity of purpose, which is what you started off by saying, that these are gaps in the arts world that you want to fill. And when you have that clarity of purpose, then as you recognize gaps, you leave yourself open to find the solutions that you would wish to see. So it's not that like completely like whimsical. There is something, that's what I see.
Yeah,
there is something very much driving it. Within that, though, you have great freedom. So it's not like I'm going to do bookstores and I'm only going to do bookstores. Because if the bookstore plays a role and then you have the opportunity for this which adds value, you are actually meandering along and allowing yourself to respond. Am I correct to say this? Yeah. Does that answer at all? Okay.
I said that, yeah.
Stunned everyone into silence. Any further questions?
Yeah, Samira? Pratishta.
Have you ever thought of looking beyond books?
In what way? I mean, without books, but literature in the...
Yes, looking at the kind of work that you are publishing,
Sure,
but thinking of it in different
sure.
or alternative media platforms, thinking of it in different ways. Have you ever considered that?
Yeah, we've considered it, and we've actually done some stuff with it. And I mean, I'd just link that to the fact that we've always been fairly comfortable with all these conversations that often happen, especially when people interview you, about how terrified we are of the electronic or the e-book or the digital. And to me, it's actually never been a competitive thing. One enhances the other. So a Seagull book simultaneously comes out for a few dollars less as an e-book. And Chicago, our distributors have all the contracts with the, the Nooks and the Sonys and the Barnes and Nobles and the Kindles and all the rest of it. We find it sells very, very little. If you have a spike in a Nobel, so that's just the e-book. We've never, by choice, wanted to only move towards an electronic format, because I've always felt a certain boutique thing is coming back now. Lots of bigger publishers, including the Bloomsburys of the world, who used to do fancy covers and toilet paper inside, are now beginning to start doing, because they're seeing that people are wanting these. But where we've been doing things because of the publishing school and one or two students, we actually did this thing called the Soho Chronicles by Kentridge, the artist, who, his videos, and that goes beyond the electronic in that sense of the e-book. It's a book with augmented reality. So it has very advanced QR codes. They don't look like those typical newspaper or fashion label squiggles. And so you take your smartphone, you hover over that particular thing, and it free downloads in the price of the book, the video. And with him, the videos change and keep getting updated on a website. So it's actually, so you want to use that. But whether I want to move only towards that? No. Two, the interesting thing is the Victor Half-Native for that big book, which you have a set of. It lends itself to a game. It's like a game and an app, and but the logistics involved of trying to do that. And when we say it's not our main focus still, so the consideration is still a kind of half-baked one, quite honestly. We're not afraid of it, but we're flirting with it and not really. It's like saying, you want to. It's like something I want to do is, for those of you familiar with Seagull catalogs, I have this little pet thing that I want to use a small text which are original to us, because people write for it, especially worldwide. So I want to launch a only e-imprint called Seashells. So for 20 rupees, you download it, you get. But then the logistics of people writing free for you, suddenly even with the 20 or a €1 thing coming in, contracts come into play if you want to be fair, some sort of a royalty, whether the person wants it or not. So it seemed like a nightmare, so we haven't really got it off the ground. You could all join the Seagull School of Publishing, because then we have lots of master classes like this. Sumit.
Yeah, I'm just wondering that you started this movement about the theatre magazine, Seagull Theatre Quarterly, right? And then it suddenly got kind of stopped. Mm-hmm. And then again it was initiated like a web version of it, internet version, and then that stopped again. But that was quite, it was really a great magazine. Mm. It was very different, and it was bringing up all the national, international theatre movements, and then again that attempt to start it. But what happened? Why did
I can tell you how we screwed up. Yeah, sure. We had it for 10 years, the Seagull Theatre Quarterly. Towards the the last 3 years of it, I think the pressures of producing whatever we were doing at that point, I now forget the number of books that we were doing, the same people were doing the books and doing the theatre journal in a cultural environment where writing for the journal is not a priority for anybody, because your tenures don't depend on it. It's a whole different thing. We had discovered that through the 10 years, that if I come to you and interview you, so I get first-person material, you're comfortable with that, but if I ask you to write, so generating that content, so towards the last 2-3 years, we started to get delayed, and you started bringing out double issues, and even those got delayed, so it became like a complete mess, and you were losing your subscribers and so on and so forth. Not that you depended on the subscriptions, it came funded. First with the Ford Foundation helping, and then later it switched to the India Foundation for the Arts. So at that point, we did a soul-searching exercise by inviting as many theatre people as you could. Between Sudhanva, Sadanand, the Rainas of the world, everybody came for 3 days, and we had this great brainstorming. And I said, okay, so what we will do is we will make it independent of the personnel that were running the publishing and physically have it in a particular place, which we did, have a different editor, and to kick off content, we appointed, say, a Sudhanva, a Sadanand, different people as editors for one issue each. You have the freedom, here's the money, do it kind of stuff. Seemed like a perfectly good paper idea, and didn't happen. Everybody got busy with their domesticities. And at that point, because it kept getting delayed, Sudhanva came up with the idea with Ramu of wanting to start an e-magazine every week, which we did, till their lives caught up in a certain way and ran out of steam. Meanwhile, because nobody delivered even a single issue, which we couldn't after a year, I actually returned 42 lakhs, which stunned IFA into complete paralysis because nobody returns funding money. And partly I did this to show ourselves as theatre community that we'd screwed up. So we had promised something we couldn't deliver. So that was a huge mess. And we tried one more time after that to try and revive it when we had the Chicago distribution, thinking, we have world distribution, they love journals, etc. But again, it would be huge infrastructure, even if we had the money, which has to be independent. The same people doing 50 books a year cannot actually also do that. Pity, but it's... Gosh.
Yeah. Well, more than a question, it's a comment. I'm truly, I was quite ignorant of Seagull. We saw little copies at the Prithvi bookstore and, picked those up. And of course, as he mentioned, the theatre magazine a bit. Mm-hmm. But it's just sitting here and listening to you, I realize how widespread you are. And I don't know what question I can ask except to learn that you have done so much, and many of us remain ignorant of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are more Seagull books here, so please make sure you that.
Hi.
Gosh, they're getting bolder.
Thank you for the evening. Just the question about when you're doing stuff that you really want to do in terms of following your intuition, in terms of the books that you're doing, how do you ensure that you're financially stable? And just a further question on that, saying, what are your average print runs? I mean, if you have to sort of,
I can
keep
tell you
things fine.
Yeah, sure. There are two parts to this, the way I would do it. One is, of course, that you're never financially stable in terms of it's a cash flow game for not just me, any independent publisher. You need to do 2-3 things. One, you need to keep on building a backlist, right? It's an old-fashioned concept in today's computerized world. Hello? Yeah, this So to do that, because if you treat, like a lot of big publishers do, each book as a profit center, doesn't work. There are books that are successful, and 2 books can then fund the next 20. That's how it works. And no, we are not financially stable, and no, it has never been a hindrance. And in terms of the fact that, what is very hard to explain, I think, is the fact that we're perfectly comfortable like this, because the excitement over doing that keeps you you balance the stresses because you know this is what you want to do every day. You want to be able to produce a book and so on and so forth. We are also very good at cross funding. So I would sell some art to fund a book. The books would sometimes go to fund a Peaceworks program. Some like the publishing school has, for example, 6 years of funding. Now it's stopped after this course. So your sustainability has to be looked at not as a project thing. It has to be looked at the 45 years you've survived in the arts. So they must be doing something to sustain it. And in all honesty, look at the produce, enjoy the produce, don't focus too much on how it happens, is another thing. And I say this because I carry baggage, which is that I've been traveling a lot of these, those of you know, I travel K.G. Subramanian's exhibitions all over. So if I'm traveling 400 drawings, I'm showing them around and all the rest of it. Then he dies on us at age 93, and I still continue to travel these. And some very dear friends in the arts who are revered scholars, writers, practicing artists, they walk into this space where they're seeing this beautifully curated exhibition. I look at their expression, they're well-wishers. The first thing they ask me, and I say, is, so what are you doing with these paintings? So I know what they're asking. So I said, what do you mean? I'm traveling to Chandigarh next. No, we know you're traveling it, but what are you doing with these? So after about 6 such times that the question is asked, I say, okay, so you want to know whether I own them? So I said, no, there is an estate, there's a daughter, I don't own them. But you're not selling any? I said, no. But then why are you traveling them? They're not seeing the show. There's 40 minutes of this totally, and these are people who are older and wiser, and I have to give them the respect of the conversation. But inside of me, I'm saying, why are you not enjoying the show? So often, I know as a person wanting to learn something, there are platforms where you can share this sort of information. But essentially, enjoy the damn thing first, that's also important. That's it? Yeah. Ajit.
What you just said, sorry, Chitra, did you have a question? Did you have a question? No. Yeah, okay. Sort of what you just said sort of leads on to what I'm asking. Could you talk a little bit about these major influential figures who've played a long-term role in the life of Seagull? Mahashweta Devi, K.G. Subramanian, and in another register, a younger person, but Chitravanu Mazumdar, as a fellow traveler of Seagull. Could you talk a little bit about these relationships?
Yeah, I mean, one came, in a sense, my so-called art life actually began with Anjum taking me to Chitravanu's and spending a whole morning of disappointing both of them because when, I came out totally, delighted, but also absolutely quiet and had nothing to say. And, Anjum was very curious. So I said, when are we showing him? Because I was doing events anyway, but I'd never done an art event. So it literally started at that level because I was very excited. I just couldn't articulate the damn thing. And so we began with him. So our art journey actually began with him. And the amusing thing was that after showing him 3-4 times and selling him well, we developed a reputation for being, people wanted to show with us because they thought we could sell. And I used to really get upset and say, actually, I don't, because we just show the work well. People walk in, they love the work, they respond, they buy. And this continued to happen, where the kind of artists we work with, Meera Mukherjee, Subramanian, these were all relationships where they were not great actor managers, they were not great promoters of themselves, like say Shubha Prasanna would be. Later even Manu Parekh became, where he used to tell me, so you organize this part of it, and let me take care of this part of it. And I would later say that, you're your best actor manager, you don't need an input from that sort of thing. And also the other interesting thing was that this was at a time when we had no architectural reality of our own. So we became known for finding spaces. So there used to be old bungalows that were about to be demolished, but you were waiting for permission from the corporation, 2 years. So you would give it to me, I would whitewash them, put up wooden battens, create lighting grids, and we would do these exhibitions. So that helped, because we were doing stuff that our peers abroad were doing in warehouses by instinctively doing it because there was need to do it. And then you were traveling those shows. Chitravanu's was like every 4 years we would hire these 40-foot containers and land up at Jahangir or land up in Chennai or at... So it was a kind of... And the one thing that I try myself, I get tired of screaming to people, friends in the art who say, oh, you contributed so much to this. Oh, if you hadn't done this... It's bullshit. I became a conduit at a particular time. It could have been anybody else. Their trajectories as artists, I don't think would have changed. They would have grown to me because these are people, who will stand the test of time. So the midwifery role, the impresario in the old-fashioned way role is what, and I think Anjum had articulated this many years ago about being an impresario of human resource in a kind of way where you're happy with other people's creativity finding it. But there's always somebody like that around in different levels who is working, which is also the role certain enlightened galleries play or curators play in a kind of way that I think. The relationships all grew to be very personal because that's the way we are. And I think it's something to do with my preferred form of writing, which is letters. So I've always written letters to people, and I genuinely, and this may sound very silly, and I don't have a distinction between a genuinely true love letter and a business letter. It's sort of like, because if I want something desperately from you as a publisher, and you're sitting in Germany, and you can sell it to the Americans for 8,000 pounds or something, why would you give it to me for 3,000 pounds? I make myself totally vulnerable and say, I love this, I'm going to make a terrific book, this is all I can afford. They also know that I'm not getting into an auction or bidding or whatever. It's perfectly all right to express it. Let the person have the power they have and then decide whether they want to squish it or nurture it and so on and so forth. So I think all of that, you become family, and then, and it no longer remained. The literary life after 2005, you started to do this with the Bonhoeffers of the world and the Yacote. It grew, which was really what the real, pleasure is, that you have a literary life that is so rich. And the catalogues, I think, are a manifestation of that. Is that sort of answer? Okay, last 30 questions.
Thank you so much, Naveen.
Well, thank
for
you.
a wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful evening.
Thank you for being patient.
Nobody's leaving, so I think you have to keep talking. Sorry, did you want to ask something? Okay. So if you can wait a few more minutes, we'll just tell you what's coming up next. And before you leave, you must check out the Seagull books on this table. And if you're not on our mailing list, please put your name there so we can keep you posted on our regular Mumbai Local events. Thank you. Edgar?
Thank you so much, Naveen.
Oh, thank you.
It was a wonderful, wonderful session we had with you today. Thank you so much. And thank you all.